So I'm going to talk about Israel. I'm going to talk about Truman. Truman is the one that's going to accept Israel as a country in 1948. I'm going to talk about Truman, and I'm going to mention Kamala's remarks, and then I'm going to Google some of the news of Gaza, and then I'm going to read the passages. It's like 7 pages, but I got some selected passages. So, very first, Truman said on Israel, he read the Bible a bunch of times. He liked that the stories in the Bible were real. They weren't a bunch of fairy tales like Mother Goose, but he said they were authentic. He was also interested in how the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, had told the same story, so that he knew that folks could see the very same thing differently. They saw the same thing, but they saw it differently, and that's why there's 4 different interpretations. And he says it doesn't always mean people are lying, and he says he wouldn't call a person a liar unless he had the goods on him. He always read the King James Version of the Bible too, not the New Translation. He said it took the poetry out of them, the New Translations did. And he said that Jewish folks would actually develop Israel, but the Arabs weren't so much about developing Israel. So he said that the Jewish folks would develop Israel, but the Arabs wouldn't. So is that a little racist? I'm not for sure why he would say that. He said Israel could be the richest community in the world. Not only could it be the richest in terms of just monetary wealth, but it was rich in history. He mentioned King Darius, the great Ramses. He also mentioned that an expert is a fellow who wouldn't learn anything new, because if he learned something new, he wouldn't be an expert anymore. 11 minutes after the United Nations had recognized Israel as a country, Truman, therefore America, is going to recognize Israel 11 minutes afterwards. So the United Nations recognized Israel as a country in 1948, then America did 11 minutes afterwards. Truman submitted to a guy named Eddie Jacobson, who was crying. Eddie Jacobson was his buddy. They had started a business that put him in debt for many years afterwards. I think they fought in World War I together. And then they started this business that put him in debt. And anyways, he could go in there and talk about, I guess he had just access to the president. And he was like, don't you talk about Israel. And he just couldn't help himself. Eddie Jacobson just kept crying. And he pointed out how Truman loved Andrew Jackson, and he says that he loved Chaim Weizman exactly the same. He said that the Jewish folks had been homeless for thousands of years. And then at the very end it said something about how his mother carried him in the womb in order to bring about the nation of Israel. So that's a little bit about Truman on Israel. Now I want to read the comments that Kamala just said at the DNC yesterday. So she says, as president, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies. I'm okay with that. NATO is there to protect the European countries away from Russian aggression. She's going to stand strong with Ukraine. You should defend your neighbors. If your neighbors are being raped by a pack of terrorists and criminals, you should defend your neighbors, because if you don't, eventually that's going to catch on to you. Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia. He invaded Austria, so he takes a whole country, and then when he invaded Poland, that's when everybody took notice. And they all united to stop Hitler. With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock, because now is the time to get a hostage deal and ceasefire done. Let me be clear. This is Bassem Youssef. It says, how come nobody ever asked, what is Palestine supposed to do to the terrorism of the last 75 years? Israel was just created in 1948. So it's a brand new country, right? Well, not brand new, it's 75 years old. But compared to America, who's been around for 250 years, and a lot of these older countries, Israel is relatively new. Now let me be clear, this is Kamala. I will always stand up, or Kamala. I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself. What about Palestine? Can they defend themselves? And will you make sure that Palestine will always have the ability to defend itself? America had an overreaction to 9/11. We didn't go after Saudi Arabia. We went after Afghanistan. We went after Iraq. It was an overreaction. Israel's having an overreaction right now. For the last 10 months, you've had at least 200,000 Palestinians who've been killed. 200,000 Jesus Christ. Jesus was a Palestinian. He was born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is Palestine, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that the terrorist organization Hamas caused on October 7th, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. You just had the Israelis, a guy had raped a guy to death. The Israel soldier raped a Palestinian soldier to death. It was caught on camera. They're going to arrest that guy and they're going to put him in jail, and then there was riots in order to let that guy out and to free that guy. And at first, when he was doing a bunch of interviews, he had a mask on, and then when he wasn't going to get any charges, he took the mask off. So we know who this tribe of Benjamin was. There's a story in the Bible that talked about how the tribe of Benjamin needed to rape a guy, and he runs to another Israeli's house, and while he's at this Israeli's house, the guy says, "You're not allowed to rape this guy." He offers the concubine. They rape the hell out of the concubine, and she crawls to the doorstep dead, and he finds her the next morning dead. He chops her up into 12 pieces and sends them all to the other tribes, saying, "We can never provide a wife to the tribe of Benjamin. So thou shalt not molest children, thou shalt not rape, thou shalt not murder." These should be easy categorical imperatives. These are red lines that you never cross. And why would you want to do that? You know, I guess it's disrespectful to the guy. Isn't it disrespectful to you? You raped the guy to death. You stuck your penis into his butthole until he died. You did that, Israel? And then apparently there was about riots. It was about to turn into a civil war. And guess who won? The people that said it's okay to rape the prisoners of war. So unspeakable sexual violence, and also how many children and women have been blown to pieces. So it's almost like, it's not apples and oranges, but it's like, these are all major crimes. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, and freedom, and self-determination. And know this, I will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to defend our forces and our interest against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. Let's take a quick Google News. Let's just type in Palestine. We'll go to Google. We're going to type in, we'll go to Google News. We're just going to type in Palestine. So Palestine, let's see here. What is Israel doing to Palestinians in Tulkarim? You have Chicago's Little Palestine, a Palestinian American. Let's talk about, they bombed a school. East Palestine residents want more time and information before deciding to accept $600 million settlement. The Democratic Convention failed the Palestine movement. They wouldn't even let a Palestinian person speak at the DNC. They said the DNC snub leaves pro-Palestinian activists fuming. We're going to maintain the empire, right? So she's going to be maintaining the empire, defending Ukraine, defending NATO, defending Israel, defending anybody and everybody. The empire is intact with Kamala Harris. We're not bringing all of our troops home. We're not going to be isolationists. We're not going to just defend our borders. We're not going to put it on the United Nations. We're going to maintain the 900 military bases and possibly get in another Vietnam somewhere. So let's see, what is Hamas? Journalists casualties in the Israeli-Gaza war. I've heard about 100 to 200 journalists have been killed. They want to erase us. Let's see, pro-Palestinian demonstrators. A lot of this is about the DNC. I want to know specifically, maybe I should type in Gaza with that, because I was wanting to talk about the, bombings. Let's just talk, let's see, Gaza bombing. So 40 killed in Gaza as Cairo ceasefire talks to restart. 40 were killed in Gaza. They're still blowing people up. Israel cannot stop themselves. They cannot stop themselves. Israeli intelligence chiefs attend talks in Cairo as Gaza bombing continues. Fresh Israeli order forces over 170,000 Palestinians to leave their homes. Bombed hospitals, buried children. How have we become numb to Gaza's destruction? Israel used U.S.-supplied bomb in the massacre of 93 Palestinians at prayer in school. So you have a bunch of kids who were praying in a school, and we went ahead and not only supplied them bombs, but $23.5 billion, which is, it's so heartbreaking. It almost feels like they're trying to break our will and break our spirit and say that it's impossible. And we're not going to get out of Gaza. We're not going to stop bombing Gaza. This is Israel and America's war. Israel and America's massacre upon the innocents. Mostly women and children and old folks, mostly people who are not Hamas or the soldiers. Blinken arrives in Tel Aviv. 12 killed in Israeli strike on Gaza school. That's 3 days ago. 12 killed in Israeli strike. New evacuation orders for Khan Yunis. Attacks continue on the eve of talks in Qatar. UN says Israeli strikes are now relentless. Journalist casualties. 5 things you need to know about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. Let's take a look at that one. What is Hamas? Kamala Harris's speech killed any hope she would end the genocide of Gaza. Some Palestinian Americans in Chicago view the DNC as a chance to be heard. Let's see. Israel strikes kill 35 in one day as Gaza's hospitals warn of collapse. Israel kills top Palestinian militant as Gaza truce talks stumble. Netanyahu is the main obstacle to achieving the deal. Torn up bodies. Israel intensifies bombing campaign in Gaza. Israel bombs the sixth UN-run school in Gaza in 10 days. Kills dozens. 30 Palestinians are killed as truce talks continue. He issued the red line back in February. So Joe Biden don't have a red line. And then there's mention of unification, which he was saying that because they both sides hate him, therefore it's unified. Israeli strikes kill at least 16 in Gaza. Let's take a look at some of these articles. Journalist casualties in the Israel-Gaza war. Israel-Gaza war has taken an unprecedented toll on Gazan journalists since Israel declared war on Hamas following its attack against Israel October 7th. There's been 4 wars. The second Intifada, the first Gaza war, the second Gaza war, and then this war here. So what, the third Gaza war? MC Abdul says he's been through 4 wars when he was just 14. It says at least 116 journalists and media workers were among the more than 41,000 killed since the war began, making it the deadliest period for journalists since CPJ. What is the CPJ? Something about the journalist. Journalists in Gaza face particularly high risk as they try to cover the conflict during the 116 journalists. 116 journalists. They just arrested Richard Medhurst in the UK. He's got to go back 3 months later because why? He's, critical of Israel, which you should be critical of Israel. There's about to pass a bill in Congress in America saying that you're not even allowed to criticize Israel. Pass a bill saying that you're not even allowed to criticize one side of the war. That's incredible. That's so nuts. It goes against free speech. It goes against everything you would think America is about. 116 journalists and media workers were confirmed killed, 111 Palestinian, 2 Israelis, and 3 Lebanese. 33 journalists were reported injured. 2 journalists were reported missing. 52 journalists were reported arrested. Multiple assaults, threats, cyber attacks, censorship, and killings of family members. Here is Israel's war on Gaza updates. So the live page, they said, is closed. At least 47 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza after yet another day of Israeli attacks, medical sources told Al Jazeera. Israeli issued evacuation orders in Khan Yunis, where Palestinian families streamed out, many on foot, in the middle of the night to seek safety. I've heard out of the 2 million Palestinians, 1.9 have been displaced. In Deir el-Balad, which means at least every Palestinian has had to move at least once out of their house. They bombed that one guy, the twin babies, and the mother and the grandmother, so 3 generations wiped out, and it looks like the bombing was right at the apartment building where they were. It was like they intentionally killed the 2 babies, and it was while he was getting the birth certificates. He just had twin baby girls. He goes to get birth certificates and then learns his wife and the wife's mother and the 2 children, 3 generations have been wiped out. A 14-hour Israeli raid has concluded in the occupied West Bank city of Tal Karim. 3 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli drone strike. Then there's something about the DNC. And then 5 things you need to know about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. So violence did not begin with the attacks from Gaza. So at least 247 Palestinians, including 47 children, have been killed before the end of September. During the same period, Israeli settlers launched over 800 attacks on Palestinians and Palestinian-owned property. Additionally, over 1,100 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced from their home. That's just, I guess, September. Gaza has been under a violent blockade for 16 years. The people of Gaza have lived under an Israeli-imposed blockade that severely limits travel, trade, and everyday life for over 2 million residents. As a result, the effects have been brutal. Even prior to the expanded siege now underway, 80% of the people in Gaza rely on international assistance to survive. More than 50% of the population are unemployed. Hospitals have consistently been out of up to 40% of needed supplies and medicine. Approximately 96% of water in Gaza is undrinkable. Electricity is only available sporadically. So not only are the jobs of the journalist almost impossible, no electricity, how are they going to, post on for the world to know? You would have to videotape it, record it, and then you would have to upload it. No electricity, no water, no hospitals. I mean, this is ridiculous. The blockade severely impacts the lives and health of all Palestinians in Gaza. Children's growth is stunted due to malnutrition. Palestinians die because they can't access medical care. Families are separated due to movement restrictions, and the blockade is enforced through violence. Israeli military incursions into Gaza occur weekly. There used to be race riots in America, so America had segregation. Black folks were slaves, then the Civil War happened, and then there was segregation for 100 years before integration had happened. The race riots would just be a pack of white people would go to the black neighborhood and just start killing as many black folks as possible. It sounds like that's what is happening here. Israeli forces fire into Gaza daily. The bombings of Gaza occur regularly. Israel's military attacks in Gaza have claimed thousands of Palestinian lives over the years. They must say more than 5,000 Palestinians. Under international law, both Palestinians and Israelis have bounded legal rights to use violence, but violence will not bring just and lasting peace. The U.S. funds, arms, and supports injustice, inequality, and the violence perpetuated by the Israeli government. For decades, the U.S. has offered uncritical support to Israel as it systematically violates Palestinian rights. Despite international agreements, there's $3.8 billion in military aid that's given to Israel every year, on top of the $23.5 billion. So they've been getting $4 billion every year. This year, $24 billion. Despite the fact that the current Israeli government opposes the formation of a Palestinian state and has moved to take over Palestinian land at record rates, the U.S. government continues to build close ties with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The lack of accountability, you can take action now, tell Congress, donate to humanitarian aid efforts in Gaza, join the apartheid-free campaign. So that's some of the headlines about what's going on in Gaza. And now I'm just going to read a couple passages from Truman. And so this is just me reading, and if you don't want to hear me read, then, well then fuck off, I had a long list of appointments that day, and one of them, you were asking earlier about Palestine, one of them was with Rabbi Wise, Dr. Stephen S. Wise, chairman of the American Zionist Emergency Council. I saw him late that morning, and I was looking forward to it because I knew he wanted to talk about Palestine. And that is one part of the world that has always interested me, partly because of its biblical background, of course. I told you I've always done considerable reading of the Bible. I've read it at least twice before I went to school. I like the stories in the Bible. I never cared much for fairy tales or Mother Goose. Not that I'm sure we had any Mother Goose at our house, but I just didn't care for that kind of thing. I wonder if you would have liked Aesop's fables. The stories in the Bible, though, were to me stories about real people, and I felt I knew some of them better than actual people I knew. I liked the New Testament stories best, especially the Gospels. When I was older, And when I was older, I was very much interested in the way those fellas saw these same things in a different manner. And they were all telling the truth. I think that's the first time I realized that no two people ever see the same thing in quite the same way. And when they tell it the way they saw it, they aren't necessarily lying if it's different. And that is one of the reasons that when I got into a position of power, I always try to keep in mind that just because I saw something in a certain way didn't mean that others didn't see it in a different manner. That's why I always hesitated to call a man a liar unless I had the absolute goods on him. There was a brief interruption while the president left the room. I later learned that sometimes when he left, he refreshed himself with a small libation or two. So he's getting drunk. Truman is sitting there getting some liquid courage. And then it said that he was more loquacious when he came back. Now he wanted to talk about the subject of Israel. In any case, he said, we were talking about the Bible. And I always read the King James Version, not one of those damn new translations they've got out lately. I don't know why it is when you've got a good thing, you've got to monkey around changing it. The King James Version of the Bible is the best there is, or ever has been, or will be. And you get a bunch of college professors spending years working on it, and all they do is take the poetry out of it. The next thing they'll do, they'll probably appoint some committee of college professors to rewrite Shakespeare. But as I started to say, it wasn't just the biblical part about Palestine that interested me. The whole history of that area of the world is just about the most complicated and most interesting of any area anywhere, and I have always made a very careful study of it. There has always been trouble there, always been wars from the time of Darius the Great and Ramses on, and the pity of it is that the whole area is just waiting to be developed, and the Arabs have just never seemed to take any interest in developing it. I have always thought that the Jews would, and of course they have. But what has happened is only the beginning of what could happen, because potentially that is the richest area in the world. But getting back to what you were talking about, that morning I saw Rabbi Weizman. It was late in the morning, and I remember he said, Mr. President, I'm not sure if you're aware of the reasons underlying the wish of the Jewish people for a homeland. He was just as polite as he possibly could be, but I've told you in those days nobody seemed to think I was aware of anything I said. I knew all the history of the Jews, and I told the rabbi I'd read all of the Roosevelt statements on Palestine. I read the Balfour Declaration, which is Britain's statement in favor of a Jewish homeland issued in 1917, and of course I knew the Arab point of view. I also said that I knew the things that had happened to the Jews in Germany, not that at the time, I didn't really know what had happened, and at that time I couldn't even have imagined the kind of things they found out later. But as I said, as far as I was concerned, the United States would do all that it could to help the Jews set up a homeland. I didn't tell him that I'd already had a communication from some of the striped pants boys warning me, in effect telling me to watch my step, that I didn't really understand what was going on over there and that I ought to leave it to the experts. The rabbi, State Department, I told him I knew all about the experts. I said that an expert was a fellow who was afraid to learn anything new because then he wouldn't be an expert anymore. And I said that some of the experts, the career fellows in the State Department, thought that they ought to make policy, but that as long as I was president, I'd see to it that I made policy. Their job was to carry it out. And if there were some who didn't like it, they could resign anytime they felt like it. There's something about, Mr. Truman had masterfully understated the case. Almost 3 years later, in March 1948, not only were the matters in the Middle East not yet sorted out, but it looked very much as if open warfare between the Arabs and the Jews might break out at any minute, and Israel was not yet a state. As Mr. Truman says in the memoirs, the matter had been placed in the United Nations, and true to my conviction that the United Nations had to be made to work, I had confidence that a solution would be found there. But pressure on the White House from American Zionists was, as Truman told me, so great that, well, there'd never been anything like it before, and there wasn't after. Not even when I fired MacArthur, there wasn't. And I said I issued orders that I wasn't going to see anyone who was an extremist for the Zionist cause, and I didn't care who it was. I had to keep in mind that much as I favored a homeland for the Jews, there were simply other matters awaiting that I had to worry about. And then late on the morning of March 13th, Mr. Truman got a telephone call from the Statler where his old friend and business partner, Eddie Jacobson, was staying. Eddie Jacobson wanted to come to the White House to see the president. And I said to him, Eddie, I'm always glad to see old friends, but there's one thing you've got to promise me. I don't want you to say a word about what's going on over there in the Middle East. Do you promise? And he did. A little later, Eddie Jacobson was ushered into the Oval Room, and this is the way Harry Truman described what followed. Great tears were running down his cheeks, and I took one look at him, and I said, Eddie, you son of a bitch, you promised me you wouldn't say a word about what's going on over there. And he said, Mr. President, I haven't said a word, but every time I think of the homeless Jews, homeless for thousands of years, and I think about Dr. Weizman, this is Chaim Weizman, head of the World Zionist and the first president of Israel, I just start crying. I can't help it. He's an old man, and he spent his whole life working for a homeland for the Jews, and now he's sick, and he's in New York, and he wants to see you, and every time I think about it, I can't help crying. I said, Eddie, that's enough. That's the last word. And so we talked about this and that, but every once in a while, a big tear would roll down Eddie Jacobson's face. At one point, he said something about how I felt about old Andy Jackson, and he was crying again. Then he said he knew he wasn't supposed to, but that's how he felt about Weizman. I said, Eddie, you son of a bitch, I ought to have thrown you right out of here for breaking your promise. You knew damn good and well I couldn't stand seeing you cry. And he kind of smiled at me, still crying though, and he said, thank you, Mr. President, and he left. After he was gone, I picked up the phone and called the State Department, and I told them I was going to see Weizman. They said something about a flag. He was staying at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. On March 18th, Chaim Weizman came to the White House, but no flag was necessary. He came in through the East Gate, and the fact of his visit was not known until later. In any case, only 11 minutes after Israel became a state in May, its existence was officially recognized by the United States. A year later, the chief rabbi of Israel came to see the president, and he told them, this is Truman, he told Truman, God put you in your mother's womb so that you could be the instrument to bring about the rebirth of Israel after 2,000 years. At that, great tears started rolling down Harry Truman's cheeks. So there you go. That's a little bit about why Harry Truman had made the state of Israel. A lot of people say that the Jewish folks need a safe place, a homeland for themselves. There's a whole bunch of land out west, Utah, and, other places, Nevada, and Idaho. There's a whole bunch of land, so it's not like there's a want of land, but the Bible, right, there's the stories of the Bible. It's a theocracy. They say it's the only democracy. Lebanon, Iraq, those are democracies as well. So a lot of the stuff that they say about Israel, and then somebody said that it was a white supremacist project. And I can see it. Why do we have apartheid? Why are they still bombing Arabs? We believe in a two-state solution. So that's enough, I think. So with the comments that Kamala had said, she's talking about Gaza, and she said, they're desperate, hungry people, and they need safety and the scale of suffering. She also said that they have a right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination, which sounds like a two-state solution. But she also says that she's not going to hesitate to defend Iran or to defend Israel, to go after Iran. She talks about, all the bad stuff Hamas did, right? Palestine is okay, but Hamas is awful. They pretend October 7th just happened out of a void. And I heard the comments, and I'm glad that she gave lip service to it. I don't like that Kamala, from her heart, when the protesters were protesting, she was pissed off. And she's like, I'm speaking. I know you got your concerns, but I'm speaking right now. And so that felt to me like she hates the Palestinians or the Palestinian protesters. People are getting kicked out of universities. So she got pissed off. Not that they were just interrupting her speech, but that her position on it was very lukewarm. And it wasn't a huge priority. America just could sit boots on the ground. We could cut the purse strings. We could force Israel to its knees and tell them to stop. If we invaded, we could, invade Israel, invade Palestine, put up a wall of American troops and stop both sides from fighting. That's how you stop when two people are fighting. You got to get in the middle of it. You got to tell the one to stop, and you got to tell the other to stop. Because they're our so-called ally. We always funnel a bunch of stuff. Netanyahu's got those criminal charges. There's just so much shit that's going on over there. And it's ridiculous because the whole world is paying attention. Even if your average American doesn't know what's going on, which that's disgusting on its face. Jimmy Carter was talking about how the average American doesn't know about it. And so when it comes to what is going on, I just feel like you compromise on Palestine, you're going to compromise on black and brown people, because it's just racism. It's anti-Muslim and it's anti-racist. So it's anti-religion. We believe in freedom of religion, and it's anti-brown people. So it's racist. It's against religion. It's a theocracy. We believe in separation of church and state because we believe in freedom of religion. The Buddhists are there. The Zoroastrians are there. Islam is there. The Christians are there. And then the Protestants and the Catholics are here and there. The Baptists and the Episcopal, the Presbyterians. And I think that the separation between state and religion has been genius. And the idea is religion, you can express yourself how you want to. You can't commit crimes. You cannot commit crimes. So I like America's stance on it, where our democracy is good. And we allow, any religious person or non-religious person to vote. So you're a citizen of this country regardless of your religion. But it's not the case in Israel. It's a theocracy. And since it's a theocracy, it's almost like, well, the Palestinians should have their own country and the Christians should have their own country. And now we're not promoting liberal democracies. We're not saying that they should have constitutions and a republic and 3 branches of government anymore. We're going backwards, and we're sitting there saying that we could have a theocratic fascist society, which I am opposed to. Israel should be a good neighbor. Israel shouldn't be bombing innocent people, especially women and children. How can you justify the killing of children? This might end all of us. This shit might get us nuked. This shit is bullshit, man.